To those who don't know me, I'm Jenny, one of the technical account managers on the East Coast of the US. And for those who do know me, I'm still Jenny, one of the technical account managers on the East Coast of the US. With me today are three experts from different facets of security management at Built Technologies. I have Adam, Russ, and Tyler. So, Russ, would you like to start by providing an overview of Built and how your security team is structured?
Sure. Built is a relatively young, we just received, thankfully, our unicorn status, but relatively young fintech company. We're located in the Nashville area in Tennessee in the United States. And what we do is we offer a SaaS product. Our base product is a SaaS product, and we assist banks and financial institutions with the financial side of managing the construction processes. We also have a lot of other products and things in development because we're moving so rapidly and growing so great. So being in the fintech side of things, we of course have to be concerned with security, utmost of our client data of the financial institutions. So what we represent here is I'm kind of the administrative arm of the security for Built, and I'm over the program. Tyler is our engineer, and he's our red teamer. He's in charge of all of that as far as what we're doing there, and also all of architecture. Adam is in charge of all of our SOC operations, and he also is doing some engineering. And then under that, we're building out constantly our team and reaching out to all the other departments to make sure we're securing data and doing things we need to be doing.
I think you kind of gave a good overview of how your roles differ, but I'd like to kind of hone in on how security priorities differ between each of the different roles, right? Because they have different angles that they come at security. So
Absolutely.
let me start with Adam, because I kind of deal with him on a day-to-day basis because he works with with me on the UpGuard side. So I'd love to hear with him first, and then I'll go to you, Russ, after that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jenny. So Russ, he gave a good overview of each of us, but if we want to get more granular, I'm heavily involved in our vulnerability management program, both internal, and then I guess later on we'll get into how we use UpGuard as a piece of that as well. When it comes to our supply chain and managing them and working with those partners, but also working with Tyler and our ops team and other folks in our engineering team when it comes to monitoring and alerting and sorting through the noise, right? And that's a priority that's just day in and day out, right? Is making sure that you're focusing on what matters the most, right? There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of false positives, and so a lot of tuning is involved, and that goes into part of it. Another big piece is managing our third-party security risk management program, which is heavily has to do with UpGuard and the solution that you guys all provide and help us as a partner in that overall program that we have. And so that's another piece that I'm involved with heavily.
Awesome. And Russ?
So I'm sorry, the question just being how they differ. So for me, I'm speaking to executives all the time. Also, well, all three of us spend a lot of time on calls with clients explaining what our security posture is, both locally and with our application. But I spend a lot of time building out the program, working with our infrastructure team as well for all the security needs here locally, and trying to guide our security program and policy the direction it needs to go. So we make sure that as we grow rapidly, because once again, we're rapidly growing, that we're covering all of our bases and making sure that I'm roping everyone in to the correct meetings and the correct discussions for the security architecture. And that's often where Tyler comes into the conversation, because I'm constantly going to him going, hey, I learned about a new product under development and I need you as a security architect involved in this.
Yeah, so
perfectly to Tyler, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect segue. The way I kind of work is a lot of my focus has been around the services that we deliver and the product side there, but we do kind of pull back up to a higher level with the sort of the organizational security, and we are pretty united as a team. So we do certainly have different roles, but we have sort of unified objectives, and that's, thanks to Russ and sort of his leadership there, prioritizing for us. So our priorities differ in that the work that we do differs, but it's really a unified prioritization for our security team. But a lot of the work I do ends up on the software development side, the infrastructure side, both the organizational infrastructure team as well as the DevOps team. And I do a lot of, I'll do a lot of our red team engagements internally, work with our external parties to get those engagements done, as well as working with the development teams and the engineers to build the systems in a way that aligns with our overall security objectives. Yeah.
For some of our other viewers, they may not know what red team is necessarily. Could you give?
Yeah, of course. No, I should stop using slang.
Russ started it, to be fair.
Okay. No, offensive security engagements. So when we're building software or building systems, we want to ensure that those are secured from an attacker's perspective, right? So red team engagement would be penetration testing, vulnerability scanning. Adam helps with a lot of that too. And so we are, when I say red team, what I mean is the testing of our own things from the perspective of an attacker to ensure that we are properly putting the architecture pieces in place that would mitigate against a real live threat actor.
Okay. Perfect. And I guess this kind of goes into the next question, which is about when you first take in your supply chain, when someone first gets considered to be part of your third party. Adam, this kind of starts with you. I guess you're the initial vendor assessment process, right? So how do you assess them, and how much do you take into account things like fourth party and security frameworks?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jenny. So it might be helpful for me to explain kind of, I won't get too into the weeds and where we were like pre and post UpGuard, but I will start with UpGuard, meaning that, we initially looked at UpGuard because we were in the process of really leveling up our procurement process. So we were helping the primary team internally that manages procurement. We were coming alongside them to partner with them to do a better job of inserting security. A lot of times security, and this is pretty common at other organizations, especially when you're growing and you're at scale and things are changing, right? And you're maturing. And as part of scale, you're bringing in a lot of third-party services and suppliers to help you, right? Augment your business to run more efficiently and whatnot. And funny enough, ironically, right, UpGuard's one of those, right? So you're in our supply chain, right? So, but your tool actually helps us manage it. So we really looked at UpGuard. We looked at others out there as well. Ultimately, obviously, we felt that you guys were the best fit for us for many different reasons. And that's grown when we've grown with you, which is awesome. And so what we did is we basically worked with that procurement team to put ourselves as a lane within that. We were always kind of there, but it was disjointed a little bit. Sometimes in the early years, right, you're an afterthought, and we were kind of working extra hard to make sure that we got in there to look, not to really say no, that's not the objective. The objective is to say yes where you can, and just to assess what risks might be being introduced, right, by you tying yourself to whatever given supplier it is, right?
Kind of like a approach with caution.
Correct. Yeah. And just be aware, right? Go in with eyes wide open instead of hope for the best and then assess after it's already a deal, right? And then whatever risks are there, it's, good luck, right? And maybe you're lucky, maybe you're not, right? Maybe you have a lot of mitigating to do, right? After the fact. So we really have a business enablement mindset. I think Russ mentioned that earlier. And so we came alongside them and helped really level up that entire process and specifically security. And so one of those things that we're able to do when we get an intake, so going back to your original question, is it'll come in from a business stakeholder. We have a formal ticketing process, and I'm really laying it out from a 1,000-foot view here. But it comes into that procurement team, and then once certain information elements about the relationship or proposed relationship, like scope of work, we've laid out some of the things that we'd like to have before it comes to security, which are a listing of all data elements that are potentially in scope. Will this service, if it's a tech service, be integrated with any existing business apps? That way we can assess the criticality, right, of the solution. A general scope of work. One thing that we ask for that doesn't get asked for a lot is proposed scope of work down the line. Like, how people ask for your goals, right? Like, you have your current state. Well, this is what we want to use it for. Okay, well, what's your 2-year, 3-year, if this is a long-term relationship with this vendor you're thinking about? It looks like from their website, right, they offer 8 times more services than the one that you're initially going with them for, right? They're going to try to sell you into that, right? Which is what they should do, right? That's part of their land and expand, right? Most vendors have that. So we would like to know as a security team up front what that might be. They may never come to fruition, but it's good for us to know so that we can kind of look at everything under a holistic lens, right? And we can notate potential future risks in the out years from the onset of the review, if that makes sense. So we try to do a holistic kind of review, and then we use, getting into UpGuard, we actually have expanded greatly our use of it to actually use its risk management features, risk assessment features that are there, to store notes, document artifacts. We'll actually use some really cool features that UpGuard has, such as notating risks that we might identify in the review of actual tangible documents, like audit reports and so forth. That are given to us. You can document all that stuff in there, which is really neat. And we can go back at any time and see those instead of hunting through tickets in a ticketing system, right? Or, control Fing your way through documents and whatnot, which is horrible. I know we've all done that at some time. So yeah, that's kind of a high level overview of where we started and where we're at now, where it's more of a well-oiled machine.
You put a lot into there that's really different, things that I haven't really heard before. For example, that proposing the scope from down the line, 2-3 years outlook is, we kind of forget to do that, right? When we look at an initial relationship, we go, you got 1 year, that's it. we don't want to pretend for some reason that there's going to be potential for 2-3 years, and that might change a lot of things when it comes to that security view. So your approach from that is also very different from someone who might be more on the administrative, like maybe Russ's side, maybe more with the executives and the other business aspects, where they're not thinking about the security portion of it. They're just thinking about the contract, the financial stuff. But really, security is a great thing to have that eye on if you can. They can answer that question about 2-3 years in advance, because you're like, if I want a relationship with you now, I don't want to spend 3 months trying to build this relationship just for a year contract. So that's really great. And I guess this kind of goes into, how does this play into your cadence of vendor reviews? Like, how do you prioritize who gets reviewed at what time? What do you review? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so one of the things we try to do as a part of what I mentioned earlier is tier, right? Which is a really cool feature that you guys offer now. We were kind of doing that on our own anyway, but where do you document that? And what's really neat in the tool, not just to mention it, but in the solution you guys offer, is the ability to do that fairly seamless now, right? So we will tier based on what we believe, and I don't want to get ahead of myself on tiering because that's not exactly what you asked for, but it's a part of it, right? And so we'll address the criticality of it. And then we'll also look at how we do that as we look at the solution itself, right? How is the business going to be using the solution? We'll look at the fourth parties involved with that. I know you'd mentioned that earlier, the fourth parties, is that even a part of, our assessment? It is. It's a little more difficult though, because we don't have a direct relationship with some of those fourth parties that they may use, just like our clients don't have a direct relationship with our fourth parties to like contractually to be able to have the right to audit them or something, right? So what we do is we'll actually go in and we'll assess the vendors or the suppliers' protocols if they have them, hoping they have them, right? To see how formal is that, how mature is their assessment process, because there's a high degree of trust that has to be placed in that, because you will be inheriting whatever good or bad relationships that they may have in place already, and you can't really undo that, right? There's contractual obligations and arrangements And so that's a part of it. And you have to consider that when you're getting involved with the supplier and assessing them.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I'm
Brett.
sorry, I was just going to interject there. I think it's also important to remember that the nature of your product, of UpGuard, and how it works is phenomenal. So you take our policy and what our process is. We're required internally to do an annual review of all third-party vendors. So we already know we're going to be doing that. Well, a lot of companies cut it off at that if they're even doing that. But with your product, we have an ongoing continuous review through the score. So we see a key vendor that suddenly starts tanking, and we've set an alert for that, and we see that, and it's like, we're going to go and review right then. We're not going to wait for an annual review. And I think that's something that's helped us immensely, not just locally with our own program and making sure that we're staying on top of that for any downstream, but also for a lot of those companies, because we've reached out and said, hey, we've noticed that you have an issue in this area or that area, and suddenly they're like, well, how did you know? And it's almost like giving them a free audit. And we become partners rather than, oh, hey, we're going to pull this deal. No, we want to use your product, but we need to understand why your score has dropped. And so I think your product has helped that significantly with get eyes constantly on those vendors.
Yeah, and Jenny, to piggyback on what Russ said there by cadence, that's exactly right. One other thing that drives a cadence of review is scope change. So we try our best to stay in close concert with our business stakeholders, right? Who are really the relationship owners of those tools or the service providers, right? They're bringing forth and proposing to go through a procurement process, right? And so we always ask, and we're always asking, as part of what Russ said in the continual assessment, which we use the tool, the solution UpGuard to kind of manage that. We're always looking to see if a scope changes, because if the scope of work changes, something that was rated low risk might be high risk now or medium risk, right? It might stay the same, but we don't, even though we ask some of the initial questions at the front end, right, of like, what is your current state, what you know you're going to use it for, scope of work, but what's your potential mid or long-term state that you think you're going to go to, or you'd like to, but you're not ready to ask for the money yet, right, in the budget. So we're always trying to do that, because sometimes we'll contract with somebody, right, and get this new vendor relationship, and they're all clear from a security perspective, and we think we know. 6 months down the line, the scope of work expands materially, and that can trigger a review sooner, a reassessment sooner than our traditional 1 year, kind of your standard industry standard review period.
Right. It's kind of like saying acquisitions happen, right? That could be something that majorly changes the scope in a short amount of time. Like they could happen the month after you sign a contract, not even 6 months, right? So that's actually a really good thing to call out too, is we talk about cadence of reviews. It's always like an annual, or if it's a high risk vendor, maybe every 6 months, but really we need to also look at how do we fit in those ad hoc ones based on alerts, right? Based on something gets flagged, like somebody's security posture dropping, drastically in a short period of time might be something worth, if they're not aware of it, bring it to their attention, and not calling them out on it either. To not say the deal's off, sorry, for this reason, here's the report, it's the Dear John letter. I think that's a really great usage of a constant monitoring system, a continuous monitoring. Otherwise, if we're just leaving it to an annual review, you might as well just have a software that just pulls a check once every year, right?
Right, and we've had vendors actually thank us, which was shocking to us. You kind of go about and you're on autopilot, right? And you're getting things done. We've had them reach out to us, and I've actually never been thanked for assessing somebody before. I don't know if I've ever thanked someone for assessing me, but it's because we provide. So we'll provide executive summary reports as resulting. That's kind of what Russ was talking about earlier. Well, it's almost like a free assessment. We'll say, hey, look, we're not hiding anything. You don't get the full functionality of the solution we use. They don't have that, right? And you got to pay for that, but hey, you get a snapshot in time, and we will share with you the results of what we find and what we've documented in our documented risk assessment or automated scan report that you can export from UpGuard, which is really cool. And what we've also found, and this is just something for everybody to hear as well, but also for you, Jenny, some feedback. I don't think I've shared this, is we've seen an uptick, a good percentage uptick in the last several months of our vendors actually embracing the shared profile in UpGuard for themselves. We've seen that where they've kind of, we've assessed them, they've kind of added things, they filled out questionnaires in the solution, and then they've gone in and they've added, artifacts in there, which is really interesting. Actually, this morning I went in there and saw 2 more that weren't in there before. And I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. They're going in there and filling stuff out, and they're finding use for themselves from the solution, not just to, answer us and our questions, but I think they're seeing that it's valuable to them to have a stronger, external facing security posture.
I want to definitely jump on that whole talk about the shared profile, because that was actually my next path. But actually, Tyler, I want to kind of ask you a question about, we've talked a lot about the kind of reports that get shared, the information that gets shared across these kind of assessments.
Sure.
So you're kind of on the receiving end for Built, not for the vendors, but on your side, how does this information help you and in your processes?
Well, from the perspective of an attacker, right, you're seeing a trend of smaller to mid-range companies who are a target for varying numbers of reasons, right? So when you're looking at it from that perspective, there's always monetary incentive. There's the incentive of stealing data. But one super crucial piece of that is that smaller to middle-sized companies are targets specifically because they are a pivot point into other entities. And us being in financial technology, we are a vendor that is potentially has downstream effect to financial institutions. And so for that reason, that is another reason that we are a target as an organization. So when it comes to vendors and the way that we review them, the way that we, see their external footprint, that's always sort of the perspective that we'll have is, all right, what of the components and services that are a little bit outside of the scope of our direct control, our vendor security posture, could be leveraged against us in a similar way that we, are a target to be leveraged against another party. So that's one thing. Another is, we are, especially for companies that are scaling very quickly, and they're getting a view, right? Getting a consistent view of our vendors and their external facing security posture is something that, earlier in my career was a very manual thing, right? We pen tested, we're going to use this new SaaS product, software as a service. We're going to have to pen test them as part of the procurement process. And it's just not the way a lot of companies are not even open to that, right? Now to say, we'd like to schedule a penetration test before we're going to use you, especially the bigger ones, are no way. So we need to, but we can't ignore that, right? As part of the threat landscape. So what do, right? Well, a lot of that looks like what was reconnaissance, and to go back to red teaming or penetration testing, a lot of that looks like the basic footprinting of their public facing assets. And what can we learn from that? And UpGuard, right? A lot of the automated pieces of that I would normally have written lambdas to do or have on some sort of cadence where I'm running nmap scans against targets or brute forcing subdomains, that's all sort of handed over in some of the intel that we get on vendors. We plug in a domain, we get that. It's just a time saver, right? It would be pieces that would have been manual effort or some custom automation beforehand. We can get that on a cadence, right? And if that changes, that's a continual monitoring, so we can get alerted when a new subdomain, shows up for a company that might have something on it that's, has downstream effects for us. So to answer your question directly, that's kind of, from my perspective in the architecture and pen testing side, that's kind of the value that we get out of it directly.
Right, to get it kind of in small bits rather than a massive lump, that you might get from just a pen test report, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because that's not only are those pen test snapshots in time, but they are not continuous. You're paying for an engagement. And so to have something that's continuous, that continuous monitoring is something that either you're going to do manually, you're going to have to write some custom automation to do, or you can have a service do it for you and alert you on a cadence.
Fantastic. So this actually allows me to go back to kind of how you offer this kind of reporting to your either partners or even your customers, the security page. So this is something I've wanted to talk to Adam about directly, and I'm happy to share this. I'd love to discuss this gorgeous security page that you added to the website. And it includes a number of security reports and the direct link to the shared profile that you've built out. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about how you planned it, what you're tracking, how long did it take to build it and implement it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it all started actually pre-UpGuard. So the idea, the concept, right? Really the driver, and one of the things I didn't mention earlier is, we're constantly supporting our sales team, right? We're a revenue generating organization, right? They're a high driven sales team. And so part of our job, right, part of our role at the business is not just securing the company, but it's also enabling them wherever we can, right? And so, like Tyler had mentioned, we're in the financial services sector, right? So our clients are heavily regulated, heavy on this estimate. Many of them have been around a long time, right? So you have the range from, assessing you in a very old school way, which still comes up with the same good information from assessing us. And you have some that are, younger, maybe banks or financial institution or lenders, right? And so they have a little bit more, agile way of doing it. But either way, you're dealing with all of it. Our sales folks have to deal with all of that, no matter what it is, right? And so they were getting like, onesie, twosie, one-off, custom, assessment types and processes to deal with. And so we were like, look, if there's some way we can just, we've done this long enough to where we know what generally is required. There's a lot of the same things, right? And then there's some things that aren't always required, but they're probably good just to lead with. We're okay sharing it, as long as there's an NDA or a, confidentiality terms in place. So, along comes UpGuard. It's coincidence. We were looking at you guys for a completely different reason for, managing the attack landscape or potential attack landscape of our supply chain and for all that. And you guys had this feature that I think just had come out, and you were really, it made us aware of it because we were in a proof of concept phase, and we had an aha moment. And so we said, okay, I think what we can do is build, right, a page that has good information. In our page, everybody hears about white papers, right? Security white papers. Well, we try to make our page itself, right? getbuilt.com/security /security, our white paper, right? And if you go to the bottom of that white paper, after kind of looking through it and getting some decent high level information that you don't need an NDA for, right? Then you can hit that button. And we explain who UpGuard is, because a lot of our clients are like, well, wait a minute, before I click on this, what the heck is UpGuard, right? I don't know if I want to go to this. So we kind of explain who that is and lead them to that. And that's where we house all of the things that previously we were having to give manually to our business folks and our client services team to hand out, right, manually, which occurs typically via email, which is security guys, unless it's being sent via secure mail. Some of those things are kind of sensitive, right? So there's all these issues that we were running into, stumbling blocks, which the shared profile, once built out within the UpGuard tool, securely houses all those and then allows our clients, and not even clients, we've had insurers now reach out to us. We've had some due diligence, M&A, right, type things where they have found that helpful to just give them access, as long as there's an NDA in place or whatnot, which we have a protocol for that to ensure that that's all squared away with legal. There's no barrier there. But one of the challenges with that, though, of building that out wasn't the time to do it. The time to do it was fairly, maybe a couple months it took, because we had to partner with our marketing team. They really controlled that site. And so we had to partner with them and get their content editing skills, right? We're security guys. We're not creative types by nature. So what we thought looked really cool, they said, let us help you make this actually look better than, we know what you guys, we think we know what you want. So they helped us do that, right? But the biggest barrier came after initially communicating to the business that it was available for use. Not that they weren't receptive, they were very receptive. This was a huge enablement thing for them, but it was the how do we use it, right? So the biggest piece to this whole thing was after that had already been implemented, the site was live, the button worked, it takes us, when it's clicked on, it takes them to secured shared security profile with all of our document artifacts, but you can't access it unless an access request is initiated by the person who's wanting access to actually download and see the information inside, right? And that's where we kind of got hung up. And so we've had to develop internal documentation to help guide the business on how to use it in various scenarios. And that's really the most time consuming part, is getting that down to where, the feedback you get is, okay, this is very easy to understand, or, hey, thanks for this handout you created that we can hand it to our clients, and that our clients can just see that and know how they can easily go through the request access process.
Russ, this sounds like this was kind of up your alley of all these conversations you have about reporting, and I'm sure the shared profile came up a bunch.
Absolutely.
How does it come up for your conversation for you?
So for me, before I went to the security team, I'd had a conversation with our chief revenue officer. And when he came into the organization, he was made aware that we definitely had some issues at times where we had due diligence packages and just, it would be the same questions over and over again, just like Adam said. But then we said, well, how can we shorten the revenue cycle? Because every business wants to do that. And that goes back to the idea of being a business enabler, or turning security into a business enabler. And so I said, let me take this and run with it and see what we can do. And that was kind of part of the genesis of how can we provide, our annual SOC reports? How can we pre-fill a SIG-Lite, a SIG-Full, any of these other documents that we're constantly being asked for? And then when a financial institution contacts us to do business, we say, here you go, just request access, and here's everything that your security team needs. So they can start on that in the background while all of the business talk and the decision on, is this the right SaaS solution for us, goes on. It can go in tandem, and it has reduced the sales cycle. Everyone is loving this, and it's been a great partnership. I think that really kind of sliding off of that subject slightly, for security people, it's good to think about how to enable the business, because security is always seen as a money sink, right? You just keep dumping money into it and you can't see that it's doing anything. If you can find ways to promote the business, shorten a cycle, like using this, or doing something to help affect in a positive way revenue, you're going to get more buy-in from executives. And I sat down with our CEO, Chase Gilbert, who is a very forward-looking individual. And before we went live with this, I showed it to him and I said, look, you have the ability to say we're not going to put our score on our front page. Most companies and most security professionals, and especially the people in charge of a security team, would say, no, don't put our score on our front page. I said, but this is going to hold our feet to the fire, and it's going to show our clients who are trusting us with their critical data that we are serious about security, and we are, here you go, this is our score. And to Chase's credit, he said, no, absolutely, this is a great thing. Let's go forward with this. And it has been great. And I've had feedback from people outside who've said, I can't believe you're doing that, but it's great. And it's just something that most security teams don't even consider doing. But I would recommend, anytime you can enable the business, push that forward so that your clients, your customers see it and go, security is important to this company. Do it, because you'll get more buy-in from the executive team.
And have you run into any kind of unforeseen issues with having your information pushed out so proactively like that?
So far, so good. Knock on wood. We haven't, because our score is really good. Now, if I will say that if you're going to do that and not keep your score up, and not you probably don't want to advertise your score if you've got a low score. But if you have a team and you have buy-in from the top that says security is our focus and we've got to protect data, then I would absolutely recommend doing it.
And to add a little bit to that, there's certainly business implications and client implications with posting or not posting that score. However, from the attacker's perspective, a lot of that score is built off of public-facing assets. And so it's not going to be a mystery to an attacker what that is. And which means that that number is extremely valuable, right? Because you can certainly present that client-facing. I just thought I'd add that in there. too, is that you know, a lot of those assets being public facing, you know, one who wants to take advantage of that in a bad way can see that information. So it's actually, you know, beneficial to all parties when that is being presented.
So that actually, I noticed I've actually had this conversation with a couple of large enterprises, right? So earlier, Tyler made a fantastic distinction of small companies are actually kind of the pivot point to large enterprises. To say that, to kind of point out too that they have different priorities that they need to worry about. They have different scale, I should say, not priorities, but scale of things to be concerned about. And I think with the large organizations, they often tend to have a smaller or a lower score because they have so much more to keep eyes on, and they have, the resources are hard to divvy out on that note. So and also you got some enterprises that use honeypots too, and they have all kinds of things in place that bring their score down because they are unsecured assets, on purpose. So definitely some good call outs there. Somebody actually in the chat brought up a question for you guys on kind of the workload that comes with changing your processes like this to be continuously monitoring instead of just a regular cadence. So it sounds like UpGuard has changed your monitoring processes to be more continuous. Is this something that has been made easier as far as being task heavy? Is this something you did before using UpGuard?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I'll jump to the task heavy. Surprisingly, no, because it's one of the handful of tools that we have open at any given time. For instance, I'm in there all the time. I know all of us, for various reasons, are in there, but in the platform. But I'm in there all the time because we're either, reviewing a brand new. Today I had two just this morning, and it's just lunchtime, right? My time here in the States. So, and I'm helping a couple of folks in two different departments review them, and we've got proactive, activity. But when I'm in there, the way it's laid out, I can see, and if anybody's dropped, if any supplier has dropped, if they've increased, if there's any incidents that have come up regarding any of our vendors that we have in there that we're monitoring. I think right now we've got close to 80 total. We've got plans to expand that to increase more. We definitely took a phased approach of how many we were reviewing, which is just smart when it comes to deployment, but also for continuous monitoring as well, right? Because you don't know what you're getting into. What we have seen, obviously this isn't the case for all vendors, but what we have seen is we actually have seen some very good response from our vendors who were unaware of what their public digital facing asset posture, security posture was. And what's really interesting is seeing some of the startups, right? Some of the smaller shops that are trying their best to kind of keep up with security requirements so that they can actually make sales to companies like ourselves that have a little bit higher standards, or even come after some of the folks we sell to that have a very high bar, right? They've thanked us, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, for kind of disclosing to them. I'm always concerned because once in a while you do run across some that push back, right? There's some pushback which drags out the time, right, to assess, because you're trying to handle all this stuff, and you get someone you're dealing with who's either obstinate or whatnot. It's a difficult vendor, and maybe your point of contact is tough to deal with. I know most of us have run into that in our career at some point. But what's really interesting is the findings that UpGuard finds. Sure, can there be false positive? There always will be false positives here and there, but the vast majority we've found to not be. They're real things. Now, one can argue criticality, right? And that's okay, right? There might be reasons why something that's showing as a high really should be a low, and that's okay, right? But they are what they are. And so we have found that the scale, the time it takes to actually work the continuous monitoring with this solution has not greatly increased what we were doing before. It's actually made it a lot more efficient, and we have a lot more eyes. We have a lot more visibility into what we didn't know before. And that was the scary thing for a security guy before, is having experience in the security field, right? knowing that there are findings there, but not knowing what they are because you didn't have something giving you the visibility into it. Well, now we know, right? We have a lot more visibility into what we couldn't see before, which is excellent.
And I guess that kind of goes into my last question, which is now that you have all this new available tools, and obviously UpGuard's going to continue growing and adding to our capabilities, and you guys, already have this great start with your security page. It's just a small aspect of it. But kind of want to hear what your goals are. We can start with Russ, but I'd love to hear each of you kind of say what your goals are for your security department, overall for 2022.
2022 is going to be crazy around here. I mean, once again, we're doubling annually and getting into new areas and new businesses. So for me, the biggest focus, I'm trying to align that with our company's focus, of course, and what the executive team is where we're going. My concern is, where's our data, and making sure it's all secured and classified. So when you think about adding all of these third-party vendors and these SaaS tools, once again, like Adam brought up, how you're using it today may not be how you're going to use it in a year or 2 years. And that goes for things that you brought in 3 years ago. Are you still using it? Oh, in the original scope 3 years ago, there was going to be no data in it. Well, it passed the security review and everything. And now suddenly we don't know that there's data in it, that we're utilizing a tool for that. So re-reviewing everything and being sure that all of our data in anywhere that it's shared or utilized or processed, that it is secured and that it's classified, is going to be necessary for the security of our business, for our clients' data, and we can utilize UpGuard to assist in monitoring those solutions as well, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, I'll speak to the engineering piece. Russ said we're flying fast, and it's true. So scale, from an engineering architecture perspective, scale is of utmost concern. So how do you secure something that's growing very quickly, right? That's subject to frequent, constant change, because traditionally security, there's the whole equation, right? The joke under your breath, sort of like security equals 1 over convenience. And to a degree that has to be true, but to a degree, I don't think that's always applicable, right? And in fact, it's detrimental to the business that's trying to scale extremely quickly. If you can't implement security in a process, a technical process or a people process, both are true, that can't scale. And it's actually not I'll use the example of we were talking about penetration tests being a snapshot in time, right? Well, it doesn't work if that report full of vulnerabilities is of less value if by the time you receive the report, we're 2 months out and the entire environment's changed, right? It's of no value. And so there's always this challenge, and I think speak to your point about strategy, right? Of finding ways to implement security controls in the things that we're doing as a company and in the things that we develop in a way that meets the demand of scale, but also is valuable, right? And that's a hard thing to figure out, especially in software development. A lot of times we're using technologies and things that that are new to the industry, right? And standards are just starting to pop up around best practices for securing certain systems, continuous integration systems, software development and building systems, and so that's a fun challenge, and we've done some cool things with that, in the years that I've been here. But there's some interesting challenges, especially as we get big.
I think you really nailed down one thing that we've kind of iterated throughout this whole thing, is that security shouldn't be a hindrance to progression. It should be viewed built. Your security processes should be built in a way that promotes your continuous growth with continuous monitoring, right? Catching each step so you don't have to backlog work because you have to fix something due to security risk that just popped up. 100%.
So the process of securing the thing has to equal the cadence by which that thing is being changed. And that's hard to do, but there are certain things. UpGuard's made that easy for our vendor assessment process, right? And there's some pieces that we're always changing to kind of match the cadence of our internal teams. Like Russ was saying, business enablement.
And then Adam, I mean, you've been so progressive in your teamwork and letting security actually help teams that people don't usually think about, like sales, making that part of their pitch, making that part of what makes them stand out. So, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are for 2022.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you use security now. There's something that goes along with it, right? Use security to sell your product, right? Use it. Invest in security so that you can use it, right? Russ mentioned earlier that I mean, it's of utmost important in organizations where possible to influence, changing the culture if it's not, but if you're fortunate enough to be in a culture, right, where it's top down security from the top down and it's ingrained. And everybody wants to do it because they just want to be secure. Nobody's going to argue about they want to be unsecure, right? That'd be ludicrous, but to try to make that argument. But to do it for revenue generating purposes to help enable you, you can't really go sell your security posture if it's terrible, right? So invest in it. It'll pay dividends, right? We've seen it pay dividends, especially in really hard. Contract negotiations where we're not really negotiating it, right? But we're on the technical calls, which is a barrier, it's a gate, right? To getting the salesperson, the sales team to get a deal done, right? And sometimes that comes at the very end. And sometimes it's the end of a quarter, right? Or end of a year, fiscal year, like where we're at now. And only then is where it's like, wow, I'm glad we invested in this. You'll have non-technical people say, what in the world is a SIM? What in the world is a this, right? Why do we have that? Why do these guys care so much? Well, this is what it is, right? So yeah, that's where we're going to really focus is just getting people to understand and working. And Russ is leading the charge on that at the leadership level. We're evangelizing that, right, at our levels and in engineering, whether it's IT infrastructure, DevOps, or whatnot. And we're seeing a positive cooperation there across departments. The other thing is for 2022, getting back to that is, one of the things is kind of old school, traditional. Phishing is crazy right now. I mean, it's when you start, and for those out there who have seen maybe positive press, right? Maybe there's some event, they have positive press. We've had a Series C so many months ago. We just went through our Series D. Russ mentioned that. We have seen a correlation, right, of an uptick of activity because of that. And it's not, and we know it's not just us, right? Directly, we know it's sometimes they'll go after what they consider an attacker at the weakest link. Tyler mentioned that earlier, which is our supply chain, right? Which then goes back to our argument internally for budget for a solution like UpGuard, right? To help us have eyes on these things because we knew that was coming. And so we're going to hone in on the features that you guys provide in your solution. But we're also going to, drill down on security awareness. We already have security awareness training, but we're really going to get, level up in that area even more so, and vuln management. So working with our teams, right, on patching, on more increased scanning. UpGuard's got an actual cool, pretty neat vulnerability, alerting feature to it. So for external facing things that might not actually be scanned. So we'll be also incorporating that more. And adopting more, which is great. I think your product guys like stickiness, right? I know ours do. At our company, we were always told about it, right? So, 2022 is going to be very exciting.
No, tons of stuff there, and definitely different perspectives too, which is exactly what we wanted from this whole conversation. So thank you so much, everybody. That's all we have time for today, folks. So thank you, Adam, Russ, and Tyler for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.